Hello again. Hi, Will. How are you?
Hey, great. Thanks, Federico. Good to see you.
Great to see you. So thank you for coming to the conference. As I mentioned in the previous my talk, Kleros curation has a very important use case in decentralized compliance for crypto assets in a world where more and more things are going to become tokenized in the future. So we've explored this in the past with the token curated registry and the governance process for listing tokens back then at Finex. So very happy for you to be here and share this experience. And let me just tell the audience a bit about you. So Will Harborne has an engineering degree from Cambridge University. He enjoys working on visionary technology projects which can revolutionize business models as well as impact wider society. And he currently serves as CEO at Deversifi. So Will, thank you for coming, and the stage is yours.
So I'm going to be speaking about Deversifi and also how we think Kleros and some other solutions can help in the future to make DeFi compliant. And I think the topic of compliance in DeFi is one that can go two ways with how people take it, whether it's completely unnecessary or whether it's going to be something that for many reasons can be beneficial to the way that DeFi works and the number of products and use cases that it can have in the real world. So I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about well, from both of those two perspectives and how we're treating it at Deversifi. So just a quick background for Deversifi. It's a exchange that's live today. It uses a layer 2 scaling solution. So not every single trade that's placed and not every single transaction has to pay gas fees on Ethereum, but you still get the security guarantees that you'd get if you used a DEX like Uniswap in terms of always keeping custody of your own assets, holding them in your own wallet like MetaMask or Ledger. And so it launched in June and is really one of the first of its kind that allows very high-speed trading with the benefits of always being in control and not having to trust a centralized exchange with your funds. So kind of in terms of what the platform offers, you can trade 15 of the top digital assets, including PNK, already on Deversifi with deep liquidity, and connect with any wallet, most of the major DeFi wallets, to trade directly without having to sort of onboard or go through any sort of KYC process at the moment. It's got a very intuitive user interface, slick feel, and no gas fees, which is one of the nice things. So if you're trading a lot, large volumes, it's much cheaper than using a DEX, but much safer than using a centralized exchange. So going forward, really our vision for Deversifi is for it to become the professional location for DeFi. And so taking some of the good things that exist about centralized exchanges, including a sophisticated high-speed trading experience with low fees, the ability to have a fiat on-ramp, advanced order types. So today on Deversifi, you can already put, for example, hidden orders without sort of moving the market if you're a large trader, which doesn't exist on most decentralized exchanges, and very fast APIs on the order book, but also with the benefits of a decentralized exchange. So flexible custody, auditable security, in that our smart contracts are all on chain. And so it's possible to always be sure that your funds are secure. And then the kind of next piece of our vision, which is what we're sort of very focused on now going forward, and really is the kind of strategic priority for the growth of Deversifi, is open permissionless ecosystem. And that's where some of these new solutions, and especially Kleros, comes in. So we need to have open listings. That's been one of the biggest and most important sort of innovations of DeFi, is that any token can be added to Uniswap, for example, without needing to beg a centralized exchange to let you list it. There's no downtime, with resilient infrastructure that's run across things like IPFS, permissionless access to the exchange by anybody, no matter what your credentials are, whether you're wealthy or not, and no counterparty risk with whoever you're trading with. And so there are a few different ways that we can achieve those, but they're very important in terms of liquidity. And this isn't just sort of a nice to have set of decentralized features. This is genuinely like a business case for a successful exchange, because ultimately having and achieving all of those points will lead to higher liquidity and make it possible for an exchange like Deversifi to really compete with some of the biggest exchanges today quickly. And so how that sort of factors in is with a community-based liquidity strategy. So today, if you want to trade on Deversifi, the small number of markets, 15 different tokens that we have, are all very liquid. And we achieve that by actually aggregating liquidity from multiple other platforms, including centralized exchanges like Bitfinex. And that's great for bootstrapping. It means that if you come and trade from your ledger on Deversifi, you're going to get a good price. But it doesn't really scale to a very large number of tokens. So if we wanted to add a new token tomorrow, there'd probably be not very much liquidity on those markets, and someone would be better off trading somewhere like Uniswap that has an AMM. And so we're solving it in 3 ways. The first is through having an extremely simple and easy to use market making solution. Think Uniswap liquidity provider, where you just deposit your funds and press market make essentially, and can start to earn a yield on your tokens if there's trading volume on those markets. So making it simple technologically is one solution, and that's something that Deversifi will launch in the next few months. The second is having some incentives on certain markets so that there's actually an even stronger reason for people to deposit into those pools and start to market make on the platform. And Deversifi has an order book as well as this future AMM solution, and so there'll be multiple ways that you can earn these rewards. But the third way will be decentralized listing. So it's one thing to have these on existing markets, but if we really want to attract new tokens, many of the new projects that are being created all the time, without having to sift through hundreds to figure out which ones are the most important ones and which ones the community really want, there needs to be an open way to add new markets onto Deversifi with minimal input from our team in terms of vetting them and trying to figure out which ones are the most important. So really allowing anyone to come through and list their token as long as they meet a high quality. And how that's determined, I'll come on to in the next step. So that decentralized listings piece is really critical to sort of growing a really liquid exchange, figuring out how to find the best tokens. And so this is one way that a future decentralized listing process could work. So to start with, a beautiful new token is born, created anywhere in the world, and it's introduced to the Kleros TCR, where it can be submitted by someone to try and get a badge. And the badge that we would create would be the Deversifi token listing requirements badge. And this could be a set of requirements that's determined by Deversifi, and it can be as sort of simple or as complicated as we would like in terms of what needs to be done, either in terms of liquidity provision, minimal decentralization of the project, various other legal questions, jurisdictions, how token sale was done, anything else. And that would go through the normal sort of Kleros process where jurors could, or first of all, anyone could contest whether or not it meets the criteria for that badge. And ultimately, jurors would be able to sort of vote on whether it did or did not if it was challenged. And post a successful award of the badge, it could be added to a list of approved tokens. And that would then enable anybody to come along and create an AMM pool for this token on Deversifi, seeding the market, and meaning that it was now listed on Deversifi, both with an AMM and with an order book. So that's the sort of flow that we could imagine. And what that would mean is that the number of tokens that listed could be very large and wouldn't require much direct interaction with our team in terms of betting, but purely be through this sort of very objective set of requirements that were set and are transparent at the start. And it has a lot of advantages to that. And afterwards, Nectar holders could, for example, vote, which is the token of Deversifi, could vote on whether additional incentives could be added to those markets. And so this model is sort of not sort of really just a theoretical one. So in a sort of past life, more than a year ago now, I was running Ethfinex, and as has been mentioned in some of the previous talks and at the start by Federico, that we essentially did a very similar process to this as a set of experiments over the course of nearly a year with Kleros back then to see how a decentralized listing process could work. So this basically was most of the pieces of the process were similar to outlined there. So we created an Ethfinex listing set of requirements and published this. It was around 7 or 8 points, which included, for example, how distributed the tokens were, the way that the kind of transparency and upstandingness of the team behind the issuance of the token, the jurisdiction that it was based in, and whether it was considered a security in Switzerland, and various other questions, which in theory could have been evaluated by anyone in the world if looking at the evidence that was available and submitted by the token that wanted to be listed. And what we saw was many different tokens applying to get this badge. And in order to do so, they had to put down a bounty of around 50 ether, which was pretty significant and meant that there was some sort of real stake in play for both challengers and jurors in the case where they needed to evaluate whether these tokens met the criteria. And over the course of the months that this was running, we saw some tokens successfully register and get this badge, but we also saw many other tokens who were challenged and that lost these appeals, some that actually applied multiple times. And I'll just sort of go through a few of those to talk about what we kind of learned from that. So one of the most notorious ones, where you can see how much evidence at the bottom here was submitted over the course of this and its appeals, was Space Chain. And I think one of the really interesting things that we saw on this and a few other cases was not just that various pieces of evidence were found by community members, which probably I think wouldn't have been found necessarily in the cases of a centralized exchange vetting process, where they have limited resources and limited time to evaluate its token, and probably would therefore have relied on Space Chain to just submit documents that they wanted to be reviewed. But we saw here instead many challengers who saw the bounties that were available for finding evidence of non-compliance with the rules, actually going out and actively searching for evidence that may exist elsewhere. And so what we saw in several cases was uncovering of potential plagiarism on websites, and actually I won't mention any specific tokens here, but claims that maybe weren't true on or were very misleading in white papers or websites, team members who even weren't necessarily actually associated with the project or may not have the credentials that they'd claimed. And all these kind of things came up during various discussions, and were then sort of, there was a series of responses from teams where they either justified things or in some cases actually even changed their websites to say, actually, we acknowledge that this was a mistake. This was translated from another language, and so we've corrected it to make it more true. And so this was a sort of real success in terms of the transparency that it brought to the listing process, and probably to improve the transparencies of these projects long term on certain topics, but also in sort of really meaning that actually for an exchange, it was easier to be compliant than it would have been relying only on a centralized exchange listing process and team, which would never really have had its sort of decision overturned or questioned by anyone. So here you can see also the kind of level of effort and work that went into some of the evidence that was presented. Obviously, the financial stake in play here was pretty significant. And so particularly in the case of appeals where tokens believed that they'd been incorrectly sort of judged or challenged to have not met the requirements, it was very interesting to see the kind of actual due diligence that had gone on. This case of Space Chain was that there were various different points that the original challenger had kind of come in to question things on. But one of them was that on the website they'd claimed 5.6 million lines of code on their GitHub, which was actually true, but it was a case that these lines of code weren't written by the team, but had been forked from other projects, and but that was potentially seen as misleading by the challenger. Now, there was no criteria from the SNX listing requirements to say that someone couldn't claim something that was slightly misleading on their website, but the challenger had basically painted this alongside a few other sort of facts, which each on their own was not considered necessary to be significant, into a pattern of evidence showing that the Space Chain team was purposely trying to mislead investors or purchasers of the token. And so this kind of led in the end to a very long series of discussion back and forth. And ultimately, I think this is a question which would have been difficult for any jury or any sort of centralized exchange to kind of evaluate whether or not Space Chain really deserved to be listed. But it was interesting to see how the community of jurors really sort of took this challenge. Ultimately, we saw many different cases decided. 100 different cases went through this process. Over $15,000 paid in fees to jurors for reviewing the evidence. And 50 different jurors ruled on these cases over the course of while it was running to determine whether tokens were compliant with the listing requirements. So going sort of forward, I think this is, and this is obviously now, this was really the first time that this curated registry was used by exchanges, but we've seen it now used in Uniswap in their token lists, and then also in other decentralized exchanges. And so really the evidence for these sorts of lists really working and helping to protect customers from seeing exchanges on tokens which may not be safe for them is really a good way that actually the community and exchanges can start to self-regulate instead of relying on slightly haphazard ways of listing tokens, which can potentially bring more risk to traders. One of the sort of nice ways that this can tie in also to Deversifi is to potential liquidity mining. So actually Deversifi is launching a liquidity mining program in the next few weeks, and that will initially be on all the current listed tokens. But going forward, as more and more tokens are added, there will have to be a process for deciding whether or not tokens should receive the benefit of these and whether that's of good value to the exchange. And I think it will be really important that if you are earning rewards for providing liquidity on markets, there's also a curated list for deciding that. So going on to kind of broader DeFi compliance, listings is obviously sort of one important topic that I think matters to a lot of people and a lot of projects. But another that's very important and which I think is growing as a kind of growing trend of evidence that will be required in some way or form in DeFi is around know your customer checks. And this is one of the things I think a lot of people hate on centralized exchanges and CeFi, but ultimately, one of the great things and best things about using lots of DeFi protocols today is that they are permissionless. Anyone can access them. You can integrate freely. But there are sort of some problems to that. One is that actually some assets that may exist in future on blockchains may not just be native digital assets and cryptocurrencies, but they may be representing shares, commodities, derivatives, and other regulated products that in almost every country in the world does fall under some regulation, and there are ways that these can be enforced, sadly, not just on exchanges, but potentially also on individuals who act as liquidity providers, and the various other soft centralized points, just as although the internet, in its inception was considered decentralized and potentially unregulatable, ultimately that there were always pinch points in the real world where that could be enforced. And so on the one hand, there's a kind of push that may require some form of KYC in DeFi. And then on the other hand, actually there can be some advantages for DeFi to have KYC, particularly, for example, some protocols now, like Aave, have introduced unsecured loans, which rely on reputation. And there's definitely a benefit in certain types of financial protocols, even if decentralized, to having a Sybil-resistant identity that you can prove to show who you are and that you are a unique individual and have met certain requirements. And so one solution that we're currently building at Deversifi is a zero-knowledge KYC system, which essentially allows anyone to prove to us and on-chain that they've met certain requirements. And those could be, for example, just that they're over 18 and come from the EU. And those two requirements may, for example, allow you to trade a certain type of market. Let's say, for example, a prediction market, which would allow you to access good liquidity without necessarily having to do a whole new KYC process on the platform. We're partnered with a company called Ident3 on that. And it's a really exciting solution, which actually at the moment, we're just starting to build a bit of a coalition for before launching at the start of next year. We want there to be actually multiple different DeFi applications that support this same standard, because one of the big benefits of it is that if a user's completed it once and created this identity that they then own, they can prove not just to Deversifi, but also to other protocols that they've met the same requirements and reuse it. So this is, I think, one really important nice step. And actually you can have your identity then linked to multiple lists to say, actually, I'm on the over 18 list, and so I can use any application that maybe has that as a requirement, typically lots of gambling applications, for example. And then I can also have the list that says I'm from a US compliant jurisdiction, i.e. I'm not from North Korea, Iran, or certain other places, and so on. And I think this is a really nice way, which is much more compatible with DeFi than just trying to slap onto every UI the kind of very clunky, typical KYC systems that we've seen elsewhere, even if ultimately there'll be some sort of frictions with that they will at least be minimal. And that's the end of my whistle-stop tour through Deversifi and DeFi compliance. But yeah, very happy if we've got a few moments to answer any questions on anything there.
Thank you, Will, for this excellent presentation. Do you guys have any questions? I do have some questions, but I'm going to let you first ask if you have any. Okay, I will start myself, and then maybe if someone wants to ask a question, they can. So as we discussed in the previous talk with Jose Luis, these markets are global. DeFi, who cares where people are? They can interact with protocols and without any problem caused by boundaries. So how do you envision the regulation of this new industry in the coming years, both coming from public actors or private actors? How do you think this is going to be regulated?
Yeah, I think there's, there's a lot of different components to it, but I think one of the ones that's coming the soonest and which is the hardest to, or has actually the least ambiguity, is around anti-money laundering. And of course, there's a lot of skepticism as to whether cryptocurrencies really are a valid way of money laundering compared to some of the much larger ways of doing it in the traditional financial system and globally, but it's something which actually particularly lots of even crypto to crypto trading is likely to start to fall under. And in Europe, there's new anti-money laundering directive, which basically means that any European-based crypto to crypto trading platforms should be doing a new standard of KYC from next year. And actually, it's likely that even if you're not taking custody of funds, that some platforms would start to fall under that. I think the enforcement really is going to end up being the hard question. And as you said, people who are using these things are global. It's actually in many cases impossible to stop people using them, and there'll always be something more decentralized, even if some protocols decide to include barriers that prevent people from certain places from using their products. And I think it's likely, as in the case of the internet, that the enforcement may come down to the entities that are operating and profiting from them, whether or not those end up being the sort of protocol creators, or whether it comes to be actually sometimes the users. And the weak point is always going to be the humans. But I think there's no obvious answer yet, and I think things have grown very quickly this summer, but we're still a little way off from getting the answers.
Good. Do you guys have any question for Will? So I don't see a question here. So thank you very much, Will, for participating at the conference. Looking forward to keep working together in the future. For those who stay at the conference, next we're going to take a short break now, and next talk will be at 5:20 UTC with Eyal Winter and the game theory. See you in a while.